Works. Good afternoon and welcome to the 4 o'clock work session for the Lawrence. I did it again for the Douglas County Commission. Today we're talking about our budget process, and we're glad to have a lot of guests here, some staff here to talk through this with us. As with all of our work sessions, we do not take public comment. And it is for informational purposes only. There'll be no action. If any member of the public does have public comment that they'd like to share as a result of this work session, you're welcome to join us at our 5:30 business meeting when we have public comment. With that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, commissioners. This is a work session that we've been working on for a couple months to try to really kick off our budget season. And Katie? Come on up. And so this work session is kind of twofold. We want to review our budget process, make sure we're all comfortable with how things are going to go over the next couple months, and also talk to you a little bit more about our community partner process and how we are transitioning from community partner agreements to service agreements, and really how we've sort of modified the structure of a little bit of that internally. So we have an extensive team of county staff here, and we've got a lot of open-ended questions. So we're hoping for a lot of really good dialogue and questions. So I'm going to let this group sort of introduce themselves for the public that's listening. And then I'm going to turn it over to Cammie to get us started. So I'm Sarah Plinsky. I'm the county administrator.
I'm Katie Fitzgerald, criminal justice coordinator.
Brooke Sauer, Douglas County Finance Manager.
Amy Owens, Douglas County Budget Manager.
Zaina Afada, Management Analyst.
Bob Tryansky, Director of Behavioral Health Projects.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. All right. Cammie, I'm already in the panel. Do you just want me to share my screen and I can kind of run us if that works?
That's fine.
If you're still getting in. All right. There we go. Hey, Eric, can you come shorten the little or Zoom doohickey thing for the attendees?
Got it.
Got it. Thank you. All right, Cammie?
Hello, commissioners. We have just kind of a,
You gotta close.
why do you have to eat it? I never wanted to be in acting. Okay. All right. So we start this budget overview with just kind of a list of things that we're going to talk to you about. If we have anything in there that you would like us to add, we've got lots of experts here to add into what we've got here to present for you. The budget timeline and calendar are included in your packet.
Too fast.
They are included in your packet. This is the general timeline of the way the budget will happen, but there's still lots of flexibility. Dates are tentative. Calendar is subject to your approval. The community partner budget request process is also included in this discussion, and how we collect that data and how we report that back to you, and how we collect their funding request. Then the proposed budget and how does it look, and what do you like? What do you want added? What can we successfully bring to you? So this is our timeline. As far as the usual timeline for budgets go, it's pretty much the same. March through April, we will be sending out budget request forms to these community partners and having department heads submit their information for budget. That actually starts very, very soon here in mid-March. We send out the paperwork, and so our community partners can start sending stuff back. During the same time, but through June, the county staff is preparing the 2024 budget information to bring to you for the proposed budget. We have meetings with community partners and the department heads during this time, as well as internal administration meetings.
I do think one thing that's just important, to note is that, our current internal department budget process requires a significant number of the individual budgets are prepared by this administration team. The way our budget is set up, it's not, there are a number of cost centers that the, administration manages the budget for. So in addition to just collecting information from departments and making sure that we have all of it together, it's a significant amount of work on our part to get other budgets into this process put together. And then also with community partners, oftentimes those pre-budget conversations involve multiple interactions with an agency. It's not just one meeting and we're ready to go. They often require at least a couple of different conversations with me, and then possibly a lot of back and forth with staff in terms of collecting the materials and making sure we have what we need when we put together the giant notebooks for commissioners in late June.
And that takes us to late June when we deliver the recommended budget to the Board of County Commissioners. And then early July, we have budget hearings where we invite those that are making budget requests to come forward and speak with commissioners, kind of our roundtable discussions, and discuss their budgets as well as their supplementals. Then in August, we adopt the budget. That I just want to say that date is pushed back further and further into August every year, and that is from the timeline for the RNR. So
and we could adjust our timeline. We could push our timeline back. If that is something, the commissioners want to do in the future. We really can't move it any more forward given where we are with the assessed valuation process, but it is something that we could look to move back. But between scheduling for NACO and other things like that, we try to make sure we get it done. And then that way commissioners have all the information they need when we set the R&R rate.
it also gives.
Sarah, for the public, NACO is what?
The National Association of Counties.
Thank you.
And R&R is the revenue neutral rate. Does not rest and relaxation, which is what I wish it was. But it is the revenue neutral rate that counties are required to establish, take a vote and notify the public on a hearing related to collecting $1 more than what we received in revenue the year before.
So then this is just kind of a picture of what the community partners process is. We send them a letter mid-March. We're right at March 15th for this year to send out a letter and budget request forms that say, this is what we want from you. Please send it back by this date. And then we take some time during April, as much time as we can squeak out of it. And the staff, Sarah and myself and anybody we can beg to help us review the budget request and really just go over making sure we have complete information so that we can provide you with the complete proposed budget. We meet with them, with the community partners to review that all the way through mid-May. That kind of overlaps some of our other budget stuff, but this is just the community partners. And then we have those hearings again in July for the Board of County Commissioners to review their request.
I think it's important to add that, every year we send the letter to agencies that have received ongoing community partner funding in the past. But in addition to that, agencies can be asked to be put on the list, and they're also sent that letter in March, and they go through the same process that other community partners would go through, and then that's brought to the commission.
So, Sarah, who initiates that? If a new partner becomes interesting, does the county reach out to them, or is there a process where somebody with an idea or a potential new community partner can reach out to the county?
Anybody can ask to get put on the list.
How would they do that, and how would they find out?
They would just call us.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah.
we have a pretty good network with human service providers and other community partner providers, but we do get asked by other agencies like, hey, how I'm interested in receiving county funding. How do I get to be a part of that mailing list? And they're put on the mailing list, and we email them the forms in March. They would need to go through that entire process. Their whole budget process would be brought to the county commission for consideration, and it would go from there. So I don't take out an ad in the paper asking for it, but generally the word gets around, and there are normally a couple new organizations every year that request to have the forms sent to them.
And throughout the year, I typically get emails from Jill or from, because she has a lot of human service contacts, or Bob will give me a name, or Sarah will, and I track those. And so then by the time we're sending out those letters in March, I've got them all on the same list. Those new requests from new community partners take a lot of handholding and a lot of helping, because they've never filled out a county request before. And so we do that just right alongside doing everybody else's.
Can you just talk a little bit about, I was trying to do quick math about how many community partner we currently are currently included in the budget, but roughly what is delegating that? You've made some comments about kind of all hands on deck and staff helping to go talk back and forth with those community partners. What does it look like for your team to be sort of deciding and delegating that? Like, is it based in sort of different areas of interest? Are you trying to figure out a good rhythm for that? Is that kind of where you're at?
We are moving towards that, and I'll let Sarah, if she would like,
Yeah.
explain.
Because I'm real excited about this. So yes, I think what part of why you see such a large contingent at this table is we're trying a new process inside administration to divide and conquer, contacts for each of these areas. And they are somewhat divided by functional area and expertise, with Bob Tryansky working with our behavioral health partners, with Katie Fitzgerald working with our criminal justice partners, and I would say criminal justice adjacent to probably a couple others that would be or perhaps folks that might be justice involved at some point. And then Jill working with human service providers. And I would say there's also, as commissioners who've been here for a while know, that not everybody fits in a neat little box in the county. We have, some community partners that are not, that are not necessarily in one of the areas. We have partners with chambers and economic development, with heritage preservation, with the Extension Council, with the Humane Society. So this team will also divide those out. And we're going to talk more about that as we kind of get to the community partner part of the process.
Can I come back to something that was mentioned twice? So one about spending time collecting materials and that taking a lot of staff time, and the other about going through to make sure that those files are complete. And I just wonder how much time and energy has been put into automating some of that, like it would be through a grant portal process, because in that case, the partner would know it wasn't complete because they can't submit it until everything is there. And there still could be some quality check that might come in that as people are learning to use that site. But pretty much any nonprofit would recognize what those portals look like, how they function. It could kind of streamline things from what I'm hearing of staff time. So talk to me about that.
It's definitely on our list, and we've talked to IT about, I think some of the success we've had with the ARPA process, and having that online portal was a good experimentation for us to see if could we transition something larger, like an ongoing community partner relationship, into that portal. I will tell you, those documents become resource documents for us year round. So, we're going to want to make sure we, they don't disappear somehow from, Brookport knows I worry if things just disappear from the system. And so, but I don't know that we can get that in place for this year's, the 2024 budget development process, but it is certainly something. And I don't know, Brooke, if you want to talk a little bit more about kind of how that process worked with ARPA.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So basically, the web form that was developed to accept the ARPA information from the applicants who applied, it just went into an Excel spreadsheet. It's a backup table. And then you just push that, whatever fields that have been submitted, you just push that out to whatever format that you prefer. I chose a Word document and then put it into PDF format, and then you can do bookmarks and links and all that stuff. So really, it was a pretty seamless process. And, if there was a required field, that applicant could not submit their form or advance to the next page to complete the application. So.
And what I would say is, I don't know that so much community partner agencies are not completing a certain section.
Yeah.
It is in review of that material there's incomplete information, or we know there's additional information that commissioners are going to want to hear on that particular agency. Also, the way the budget is presented in that document is
Mhm.
different than how most nonprofits look at their own budget. We sort of ask them to crosswalk their nonprofit accounting into general public accounting. And so for a new agency in particular, they need some help sort of understanding what we mean by things like fund balance when we're normally used to talking about assets and liabilities.
Sure. And yet, I mean, in your organization, maybe not brand new ones, but would recognize that going for funding of any sort means reworking the budget the way you use it internally to how a budget is expected for that funding. So that's very expected and known, very normal ask. I would also say in terms of how some of those portals are standard across the industry, that a lot of organizations use them. And so they're, presumably on the back end, easy to customize and easy to pull information out of, that are different from a web form where you can't necessarily move forward until you've finished one. Like there's some that are just easier to use that might not require as much from IT because some of it would be more packaged. So I don't know what those cost. But if you want to talk about some options, I can probably pull some that are good.
Be something to look at.
Yeah, I would tell you that our goal has been to get to that, but a lot of our work is, we've discovered that these community partners have grants with somebody else that came up that maybe they didn't know what all we wanted disclosed, or maybe they're trying to fit their fiscal year budget into a calendar year budget. And so it's a lot of the technical details more than the fill in the box. We largely let them decide what they fill in as far as what their community partner summary is and what information they're putting in that. But yes, we are very interested in moving forward with an electronic type of collection. These are the major sections that are requested on our budget request forms. The community partner summary and overview is within this letter that we send out with them. It's mostly instructions on how to fill out this form and if you have questions, and a phone number attached to it so you can call me or email me. And that is a lot of what they do, a lot of that to try and fill these forms out, which is great because doing it on the front end is much better than not. Then we ask them to align to a county focus area, and we give them a list of county focus areas. I'm not seeing the whole letter right here, but I made a copy for you guys. Give this to you. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm not closer to you. So you'll see that I label them page 1, page 2, page 3. These community partners turn in budget request forms that are 5 pages long, and some people can expand it and make it a 20-page long document. Just depends on how much of a story they really want to make sure they're telling us. And so they're not restricted to those page numbers. That's just the original guidance when they get in there. So then in the alignment to county focus area on that page, they are given the choices of human services, heritage, infrastructure, land records, public safety, and workforce development. Those are just the headlines on there. And we just try to see how they align with what the focus area is. And we do some discussions with them about what they put there. And if we think they're just way off base, we have a discussion about it, but mostly they've all just fit right in. There's equity considerations, and I'm open to anything you would like to add to this. We've got questions here to kind of initiate their response, but that was added 3 years ago, and it's been a very useful tool. Page 4 is the crazy budget request, community partners budget detail. And this one, I say it's crazy just because they're trying to understand us and we're trying to understand them. And we're trying to put all the money and make it look like government finance so that we can understand how they spend their budget. The next one is a budget analysis, and we ask them to tell us anything that might be different within their budget that we aren't understanding. So if they have, restricted reserves, or if they have a lot of equity in a building, but they really can't do anything with it, that kind of thing. And then the supplemental request, we give them an additional page. It's just very free. They can add any additional documents they would like to it. And they can also give us any supplemental documentation from their organization that they think you might need. Target dates for community partner data to the commission. This is a very fluid slide right here. These dates are fluid is what I'm trying to say. We just wanted to kind of get an outline and get some feedback and see what commissioners thought of when staff should begin to develop new contracts. We decided internally that that should be late in the year so that it can be ready for the first of the year. So right after budget is adopted, approved, the staff would begin to develop those new contracts. And then the goal is for December to send those out. Mid-March, data collection from the community partners that we have pulled from those submittals.
And maybe this is perhaps, Cammie, where we can
Lots.
start, have a little more conversation and, invite like some of the rest of the team to participate. You're going to see in your packet, you have a copy of the spreadsheet for community partner tracking that indicates the number of community partners that are currently on community partner agreements versus service agreements. We have a number of partners that are already on service agreements, and we're getting a lot of really tremendous data. And so, but what I know from having done county budgets for over 20 years now is that during the budget, it's a really difficult time for commissioners to dive into that data, to spend time on it. There's so many other decisions that have to be made that it just doesn't get the attention it deserves. So what I think this team would really like to do is talk about other opportunities throughout the year to bring you that data. And, I think we're interested in that. When is, what is too much? What is not enough? When is it valuable? And, what would you like to see? So this idea of, mid-March containing prior year, total year data is something we've talked about, and that would also set things up well for budget. But then also a conversation around in September, to help review maybe what we've seen so far that year to help us form like performance measures and performance indicators to include in upcoming agreements. And I don't know if this isn't kind of a chance, Bob, like, do you want to kind of show them we thought maybe like seeing some of the data we have would be helpful and might give commissioners some ideas.
So I'm gonna, just give me a second here so I
I need to stop sharing.
can share and. Thanks. So we have a number of partners. I'm just going to give you for example, in the behavioral health space, we have a number of partners, we have a number of projects, we have a number of programs. Some of those things are distinct projects that the agency does.
Even closer, Bob.
Okay. Some of those things are distinct projects that the agency does to serve the community. Others are part of a larger collective impact type of an effort. And still others are integrated. So if you think about our behavioral health system of care, for example, we have, or we will have moving forward from this year, the treatment and recovery center, the 988 crisis line, mobile response, intensive care coordination, assertive community treatment at Burt Nash, a lot of pieces that fit together in one system. But we have partners who are responsible for one piece or another, right? So the question becomes, how collectively do we understand what the system is doing and then be able to drill down specifically and look at what an individual's partner's contribution to that is. So I think in a lot of ways, Burt Nash provides us with a great opportunity to look at kind of how things have evolved, because we have really asked Burt Nash over the last couple of years to get more granular in the data that they share and the results. And so this is, Burt Nash submits a quarterly report. The quarterly report goes into detail with sort of demographic information about the clients that are served at Burt Nash, the various services that clients receive, intakes, time from intake to first appointments, those types of overall, how do things work at Burt Nash? And then they provide us with data that allows us to zero in on sort of those components that the county specifically is funding. So for example, what is the county's investment in offsetting the cost of the sliding fee scale? That's a major component of what we do to support the work at Bert Nash and in our community. So Bert Nash reports back, obviously, how those dollars are allocated, how those dollars are spent. What I wanted to pull up was another example would be like psychiatry services. So starting in 2018, the county made some major investments, first at Bert Nash and at Heartland, then exclusively with Bert Nash to increase the number of psychiatrists that we have in the community. And so what Bert Nash provides us with is, a quarterly summary of how those dollars that support and offset the cost of particular providers, how that impacts the number of patient encounters. So the number of patient encounters by quarter, the number of patients served, the number of new patients, and Bert Nash has also been providing us, for example, with like no-show rates. So when we started this, because of this data that we have been looking at for the last 4 or 5 years, in 2018, the number of patient encounters was 1,600 patient encounters. Today in the most recent quarter, it's 2,190 encounters. So it shows how that investment has really driven an increase in access to med services, for example. So this is an example of something that we monitor quarterly. We have conversations with Bert Nash. Bert Nash participates with our other partners on a psychiatric infrastructure group so that when we're asking ourselves, how is the county's investment in psychiatry yielding better access in the community? This is the type of data, this is the type of metric we look at. If we want to look at behavioral health court, here's an example of data that we receive in terms of how dollars translate in terms of services to serve the 26 people in behavioral health court. We've started having conversation with Bert Nash this year about kind of going beyond this sort of data point, which is looking at the costs and services of behavioral health court, to actually looking at client outcome data and sort of, obviously protecting people's private health information. But if how do we tell whether the clients in behavioral health court are not just staying out of jail and being successful in terms of criminal justice metrics, but are they getting better? Are they maintaining tenure in the community, having an easier time maintaining tenure in the community? Are they able to thrive in the community? So so these are the types of things we look at with the Bert Nash report. They report on the RAP program, they report on sliding scale, they report on behavioral health court, they report on transitions and our investments in the homeless outreach team, for example. And so, we haven't spent a lot of time with the commission reviewing this. And so one question that we want to ask is, how do we want to, and how frequently do we want to take a look at things like psychiatry? Is that something we have to look at every year? Is that something we look at every other year, every 3 years? Community health plan is a 5-year plan. We have various pieces. Am I teeing this up okay?
Yeah.
For conversation.
And this is just one metric of, an approximate 40 some community partners. Katie pulled a couple from KHD, and I was going to have her talk a little bit about those.
So I was, as we've been talking in preparation for this meeting, what I had shared was, and you all were here in December 7th when Sam presented his year's worth of data for KHD. And my approach to them, that was a very long presentation, and he's another partner that collects a lot of information as well. How I've thought about it and talked with him last week about for me, I would think about what are the top 3 measures for him that when I think about the services that the county funds and what the county is interested in seeing from Kansas Holistic Defenders. For me, the 3 things that I would be most interested in reporting out to you all from their agency would be things like the number of referrals that his office received, and also these cut by demographics as well, because that agency in particular does a good job of capturing gender and racial demographics for us to get a sense of equity. The average caseload by attorney, that's a really important measure for any of our legal services, from my opinion. And then also the case outcomes that he and his staff and time to disposition we're able to receive for their clients. So when I think about that presentation that he gave to you all, for me, those would be the three big key performance indicators from that service that I feel like would be most important to make sure you all knew about, however often throughout the year.
Go ahead.
Can I back up just a little bit? So we have this form that goes out to community partners at budget time, and it asks for some fairly basic information, not a lot of detail. Like there's not a lot of things that are asked there that could be asked. And yet some of the organizations are getting into this, service agreement kind of level where we are getting lots of good data. So which community partners bridge from what is offered in the budget information to what we're asking for that's not in the budget information?
Say that.
What we ask for in the budget information is fairly slim in terms of getting we're not asking for outcomes and measures. We're not asking for their goals.
But many of them already give them to us in those formats.
And we can also ask for them specifically, and
We
it puts
can.
everybody on the same page. It makes those applications then much easier to read as you segment that data into not just a long narrative, but I can go straight to the pieces that I care about and find them there, and by asking the right questions. But what I'm getting at here is we have that format, and then we have some organizations that are giving us quite a bit of data because we're asking for them in another mechanism. So can you talk about which of them bridge from giving us the budget information to being asked for kind of the level of information we were seeing from Bert Nash? I assume that's in their service agreement.
Yeah.
But not everybody has that, right?
So let me pull up that spreadsheet on the screen so you can see it. It's in the panel. It's in the. Okay, I need to go to the. I need to go to the agenda item. Because I think this is too small, but maybe we can blow it up so you guys can see it. Yeah, you want to pull up can you pull up the spreadsheet that's embedded in the PowerPoint? And then that might be easier to share. It's because we've tracked in this, and I'm going to try to make it bigger so we can see it. It's really tiny. So in this spreadsheet, that's the community partner summary report, which is kind of a combination of a couple of different series of data that is included in the budget book and other places. If you look at this column, yeah, it's kind of aligned here under the column service agreement /SA or community partner CP. So if there's an SA there, and I can try to make it even bigger, they are on a service agreement already. I'm going to move it over. And then if they're a community partner agreement, they basically just complete the agreement, and they give us their 990 and their budget documents. Now, some of them have some really good data in there. And that's part of the process that we go through each spring to get that. What I would also say in that, Commissioner, I think one of the things that we've struggled with is, there's so much variety amongst our community partners that trying to make a historical society that has no paid staff, and receives $10,000 a year from the county, do the same level of detail that Bert Nash, who is going to be close to a $45 million organization here before too long, really isn't something we struggle with that. And I also want to know from commissioners, like, maybe you don't need that for all 30. And so when we've talked about this, because we're going through this process to sort of divide up how we're managing community partners, I don't know that every community partner is going to move to a service agreement. And I'm looking for some guidance from the commission as to how do we make those distinctions. If you go down on this list, like, you're going to see that the third one on this list is Cottonwood Incorporated. County gives Cottonwood $686,000 a year. It's a pretty large community partner in our book. And they're on a community partner agreement. So, you know, that to me would indicate by the dollar amount and our investment in them and their annual operations that maybe they should be moved to a service agreement. But is there some sort of threshold in there where we're still comfortable with them remaining to be a community partner? And I don't expect your answers on this today. I think this is the kind of thing I'd like to get some feedback on as we go through this calendar year and work on this process. But, you know, I think we struggle with where's the line? And a lot of that is, you know, what's important to the commission.
So one thing I've been thinking about, I mean, some of the data, and I want to say publicly how much I appreciate Bert Nash giving us all this data and Kansas Holistic Defenders, because it's not easy to pull and it's extra work that we recognize. And that as we've sort of made this move over the past couple of years to be more data driven in our decision making, that's put an extra expectation on our organizations. So those, I think we do need to have a conversation about if it's almost like a grant, a $10,000 grant, do we need to do this, you know, the same thing that we do for other organizations that we fund more fully? But one thing I'd like to explore a little bit is something that Bob sort of talked about, is sort of performance versus impact. And I do believe that there's some performance indicators that may be very helpful to staff to just know, is that service working? Is it providing that? But that as a commissioner is not as important to me. What is more important to me is impact. Is how do we see, by providing psychiatry services, what was the impact to our community and how did it reduce this or that, whatever, you know, and maybe it's looking at the community health plan and determining some of those things. But I do sort of, I'm curious, and this isn't a fully fledged thought, which is also always dangerous in a public space as an elected official, but is there some, you know, sort of goals that our partners would be willing to write that says, I expect that we will achieve these types of outcomes or these type of impacts over time? Because as a commissioner, that's what I'm really interested in hearing. Certainly there's a space for just actual service and performance, but I'm also interested in hearing how is the work that you're doing and taxpayer dollars are funding, you know, making Douglas County a better place to live. So that's just my first thought. And I really want that to be driven first by the funding partner, because they know best where they think they can have the most depth, but in collaboration with staff, like this, you know, is it realistic? Is that something, because that would be something that I think would be really helpful at a work session, to hear like how much progress are we making on that?
Yeah, I love this conversation. I think impact measures are incredibly exciting. They're incredibly hard to do. And I think as long as we're focusing on a few and a couple of key areas, and I know Bob's brain's probably working on this, like I think that is something we could try to achieve. Like, but I think it's going to be it's easier to come up with outputs and performance indicators, but trying to translate that into how we're going to turn that into the impact we're having I think it's a great goal and aspiration for us to have to figure out how we could get there in certain areas, but it is certainly a bigger challenge.
Well, and I think we have to be sensitive when we ask partners to commit to a particular benchmark. What's the consequence if you don't hit that particular benchmark? You know, and if we're just getting started in this process, we don't want to be in a situation where we're trying to encourage growth and experimentation and improvement in a system that we don't own the community, right? We invest in trying to improve the community. So we want our partners to be willing to take risks and to be willing to set bold goals or aspirations. We don't want to discourage that by, you know, well, if you don't hit this mark, does that mean my funding gets pulled? You know, in some cases, maybe the answer to that question is yes. But I think you know, if we look at, for example, in behavioral health, we want to figure out how collectively we are agreeing to have shared purpose around, here's how we'll know if the system is getting better, because we share ownership of the system.
So I'm so glad you said this, Bob, and I too could talk about this forever. So for one, that's about data culture, you know, that data culture is not a gotcha. It is an opportunity for discovery and for curiosity, and not a, you didn't do this. I think that's more like a service agreement to me. You know, like you do this, we get that. But a community partner agreement says to me, we're trying to reduce a certain number in our community. And I'm hesitant because I don't want to project onto our community partners what we want them to do. I want them to come to us and say, you know, this is where we think we can make an impact. And I think it's up to the commission to say, like, what did you learn? If you set that goal, what did you learn from it? That the funding isn't related directly to you making that achievement, but it's more about how do we continue to grow as a system? Because maybe we'll see gaps then as we articulate that. So you didn't hit your goal. Okay, that's fine. What about it caused you not to hit your goal? And how can we adjust our system or make interventions in the system that will help us to achieve those goals? So a lot of that's just about data culture. And I, as a commissioner, I don't ever want to say to an organization, like, you set a goal, you didn't make it, you're out. But I do think in the service place, there's some room for that.
I want to tag along what Commissioner Kelly said about having the organization set those outcomes and measures, especially as this is a newer part of the conversation with community partners. I think that is key. Organizations need to be having those discussions with their own boards and their clients and their own community that they work with and serve to determine, as part of their identity, what are their outcomes and measures that they care about. And then that becomes less of, you know, we told you to do X and we are your funding agency, to have us in that conversation as your funding agency. Tell us your story. And that's part of how they tell their story. So data culture, but also kind of that culture of between the funder and the funded, how we have those conversations. And I think starting with the community partner, offering that, we have to ask for the information, but having them outline what those things would be, I think is a really key part of how that conversation gets started.
I really like this, that I don't think I've ever really heard it quite expressed as data culture before. So I really like that. And I do think this is an opportune time to sort of mention that part of how we've structured this internally now with Jill, Bob, and Katie being owners of service agreements, they're going to be assisted in this process by Cami and Zaina as in an analytical role, reviewing those reports, making sure that and identifying, like, based off of their knowledge area. Well, it would have been Zaina, but she's leaving us, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, I knew she was waiting for me to say that. So having an analyst really, and review those data, identify for the owner, which we got to probably come up with a champion, a great, so a service agreement champion in that area, and going to Bob and saying, hey, look, like this measure has changed over time. And I just wanted you to make sure you saw this. And Bob's like, yeah, I think I'd heard something, a conversation about that. How do we elevate that conversation? How do we use data to inform our processes proactively as opposed to just reactions? And I really feel very strongly that if we are going to collect this data and we're going to ask this of organizations, somebody who collected a lot of data for a number of years, an analyst that was never used and never discussed by a governing body, it's very demoralizing for everyone, both the staff that has to spend all that time working on collecting it, and for the agencies that are like, they don't even care, So I think it'll be an intuitive process between us, staff, community partners, and electeds as to what's meaningful to you, what provides impact, and what can we give to you in a way that you're allowed to digest it and then use it to drive decision-making and vision for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as a person who collects a lot of data that nobody ever talks about, I do think, though, that there's a place for key performance indicators that staff may look at. I mean, because if we set those performance indicators in a service agreement, the staff is analyzing it, then either the service provider hasn't met those performance indicators or not. That's different to me than a community partner
Right.
who may be setting impact goals and saying like, you're funding the larger organization. And we have lots of organizations that we just fund them. Here's a set of money for general operating. Tell us what your goals are. Tell us how you're getting to your goals. That's different. I think that it's in two different categories. So that you asked for feedback. That's where I'm going.
As a person who loves data and wants to read every bit of it, that's been something that I've wondered is how can we capture the work that community partners are doing and, elevate that may not be just within the budget timeframe because you guys are so busy. But I am very eager to find a time when we get a chance to have those conversations and hear back and forth with partners so that we feel like a partner and not just kind of someone that they have to provide this information for. And I just want to come back and not lose, we're not asking for very much. We're asking for less than the average $10,000 grant would ask for. And some of our partners are huge. So I think it very much could be designated into, buckets. Are you going for and I kind of have scribbled in here, less than 15,000, less than 100,000. And some of these partners are, above $1 million or close to that, and then need to have kind of some special treatment in terms of those are probably service agreements already or working in that direction. So I don't think we need to be shy about asking for data. I do think we have a responsibility then to use the data as part of that ongoing conversation, but we're not asking for very much.
Thank you. Going back to that. So what do you guys think about this idea of sort of a March and fallish, September, October, as two opportunity, in addition to you're going to get lots of information in budget. So like that's going to happen. Do those seem like reasonable timeframes to sort of get additional, have staff bring that to you?
And I think we could come up with that and set it. I also think that it would be worth having some conversations with some key community partners. We can't maybe have all of them on board with the same time frame, but to ask, some of them have different fiscal years and can do data collection more efficiently at different parts of the year so that we're not asking for more work. So like in a March timeframe, if they have a calendar year, fiscal year, asking for year end data is not onerous. They're probably doing that anyway. But having some of those conversations, and we may not have to have all of them at the same time of year because we can't fit them all in anyway. So I think it could be designated with what actually works with community partners that helps them tell their story without adding a whole lot of additional work.
We've definitely talked about that. Like maybe not everybody reports at both of those opportunities. Clearly, I think for service agreements, the fall timeframe is helpful in making sure that we have the right measures and data tracking for the next calendar year. And I'll just be honest, like that timeline that Cammie showed about September through November is ambitious for this team. We're still working on completing community partner agreements for 2023. So this would be a real move up for us to try to get some of that done in the fall. So I'm also trying to ask this team to level load and decide, what they think they can handle in that time frame. So I do think that's something we need to be serious about. Can we deliver that on behalf of the commission?
I think I need a little bit more clarity in the space. Do you envision that the spring and fall are sort of the same thing, maybe just dividing up the partners between those two times? Or do you envision that the spring is about looking back on the prior fiscal year? And then is that the same sort of expectation or framing that you have for fall, or would fall be a different conversation? I think, and to Commissioner Willie's point, I think it is probably important for us to have some level of understanding across community partners what timeframes might make the most, when they're already doing some of that data collection and look back on a previous fiscal year. Obviously, they won't all align. We don't align with the states. budget year. But that seems like it might be helpful and informative in how to sort of organize that in a fashion that makes sense. And then are we having sort of the same conversation twice a year, both just with different people, or are they different conversations?
I kind of see them as two separate conversations. You know, I think the March conversation is about prior year. You know, what happened in the prior calendar year, preparing for a budget conversation about a future calendar year. Fall, I will tell you, and I mean, and I think commissioners get this, you go through budget, you're like, we got all these great ideas, and we got all these things we're working on, and we get started right away. And so that becomes then future focused to me. So the fall conversation could be what kind of data, what kind of things do we want in their service agreement for the future that aligns with maybe the decisions you made at budget or conversations you had. I'm going to take us back to truancy, which was a large conversation the commission had last summer. We then worked a lot, started working this fall on how do we improve truancy efforts. We're making progress. We're not there yet. But that could have been a conversation, to me, then that would have been a conversation that now I wish we would have gone back to in the fall and had a more clarifying conversation about what we were trying to achieve in the fall, so that we could have perhaps given some more direction to those partners. Maybe it would have helped us, you see what I'm saying, and or, hey, we had this great conversation at budget. We've talked a lot about with our aging partners, about how they could work collaboratively. What are some things that could happen in that space? We're putting some things in place like mobile integrated health that are going to be, I would call like system cutting or system crossing in terms of the number of agencies that they might work with. Fall could be a really good time to think ahead about like how that would work into their next round of service agreements based off the budget they have. Let them get started on that, get the fiscal year over with, and then we reflect a bit on the prior year. So, I mean, but we're all brainstorming at this point. So, but that's kind of where I was thinking right now.
That's helpful. And I mean, I think that makes sense to me. It also stands out that maybe, fall is a little bit more, it's a smaller set of conversations. As perhaps it's just the partners that are either new or that are asked for supplemental requests that got granted, new services, or changing what we used to fund and now it's a different service or different project. So it's a smaller set of maybe more specific conversations, and that spring perhaps is a broader and far-reaching conversation where we're able to sort of in those different focus areas or different, however it is that we feel is best to sort of organize the different types of community partners and agreements we have, and have, a series of conversations that are a little bit more broad, looking back at the past fiscal year, that gives us as commissioners a little bit more context and detail going into their upcoming budget requests.
I think if we were also looking to kind of segmenting some of these by fund amount, that might be, maybe we don't call historical organization X up for their $9,000 and have a public presentation from it. Maybe instead those can be, staff is already in communication with them, but maybe a commissioner just reaches out and has a conversation. I don't think it has to be the same level for all. So that's another thought.
I also think we can group some of these things. So
Yeah.
we can pull crisis system components together and look at all of those projects more holistically. And I think we could also get, I don't know that we need to do this every year. What you want to understand with an initiative like Behavioral Health Court is how are things progressing over time. That might be every other year evaluation, and every 3 years, something a little bit more substantial. If we're gonna get into the business of having independent outside evaluators, what's the schedule for that? What's the target for that? I think setting, a framework for that is the type of thinking we want to be doing. So we're not just racing to get these data reports in and get these PowerPoint slide presentations, done. Let's make the presentations meaningful, and let's make the learning deep.
Yeah, I appreciate that point, Bob. And I think that there probably is something to be said for considering that perhaps in every other year schedule, one that's sort of, I think, it's just easy in terms of how election cycles go and commissioner, maybe new commissioners coming on board. So figuring out a sequence there, and also, 2 years of data is probably a little bit more meaningful, and the opportunity to dig in, knowing that staff is doing that regular evaluation, specifically if we've got service agreements that have those performance indicators, that monitoring is regularly going on, but to have the larger conversation. I mean, I will say this throughout this conversation today, I'm just thinking about the additional load that is for staff in what is already a, pretty intensive budget process and calendar each year. And so I just want to be mindful of that, and that maybe there's a place for things to not occur the exact same year after year, but with still some regularity.
I think kind of with the way the conversation is going and the direction that we're giving, I think staff within the community partners that they manage will probably get a pretty good instinct for when that update maybe needs to occur, whether that's every year, every other year, and what level. So I think there might be kind of some ongoing discussions between the community partners and the staff member that's kind of managing this end of it to come up with a shared understanding of what would be most healthy, rather than us dictating, by this dollar amount, you must come at this frequency or something like that.
I thank you, and I appreciate that kind of flexibility. And also, just as a reminder, like a significant number of these initiatives inside the criminal justice space are with our partners, with the district court, the district attorney, the sheriff, and as well as criminal justice services plus outside agencies. So we need to think about, it's not just a community partner agreement. It's also, and I think we have a really good track record of doing that on the CJCC side in terms of reporting out on projects and their programs and data. So I think we can borrow some, but it's not all going to look the same. They're not all apples. I wish we had that kind of consistency. So I think team, do you guys have any specific questions you want to ask them about this? I want to give a little bit of time to talk about the proposed budget and get us wrapped up here relatively quickly. But I think what my hope would be is that this team could go away and kind of maybe give you some ideas and frame this out a little more, and based off of this feedback, and then we could bring something back to you and kind of talk about how that process would move forward.
Yeah, make sure we get on to the last
Yes.
part that you had there, but just maybe one, I do think it would be good for staff to look at some thresholds of different expectations. One other thing to maybe look at is what percentage of their budget is county funding. Because for some it's a very small amount, and for others it's a significant amount. So I think that may be another, between those two, is there a spot where it puts you in this category? The last thing I just sort of share is I'm sort of curious if, we have these common focus areas, is that a way to do some sort of reporting to the commission? Because it's really not just about the individual partner, it's about how the system is working as a system. And some of the conversations I've got most excited about in this space are when all those partners are here discussing and collaborating on how they work together.
That's good.
I think it's also possible that this work session environment might be a healthier place for some of those conversations than, strictly speaking, as a regular item on an agenda, because we get a chance to get a back and forth, and there's less chance for misunderstanding, and it feels like a healthier conversation.
I think that's absolutely what we want to do. We did want to take a little bit of time and talk about the proposed budget. And this has been kind of a particular, something I've been really wanted to focus some attention on. And I know Commissioner Kelly, it's something that we've talked about as our budget process is so detail oriented that it is, and the amount of data that we prepare for commissioners when making decisions on the budget is more than I have seen any other government of our size prepare, particularly with the size of organization we have. That being said, it is not easily digestible by the public. And that giant notebook that commissioners pour over every June isn't something that necessarily we would ask the community, and they shouldn't have to read an entire five-inch ring binder to understand what's going on in their county budget. So, but as somebody who's way inside the system on thinking about these things, it is impossible for me to sort of set that aside and think of what would the general, John Q citizen or Jane Q citizen want to have to see in their proposed budget. So, one of the things we've just really started brainstorming some ideas here, and Cammie's done a little bit of research. Let me see if I can get this to go down. I'm going to come back to this, Brooke. In terms of some conversation around what some other organizations do. And what I think has happened in the past with us is that we focus on the supplemental requests that might be added as opposed to the base budget, the underlying $175 million that the county allocates and deliberates. Back to this, our Socrata tool, our open budget is a tremendous tool for citizens to play and to maneuver, manipulate, and talk through our budget. So maybe, Brooke, you could just talk a little bit about some of that functionality and maybe how we could perhaps use Socrata in this process.
Absolutely. In 2018, Douglas County launched the open budget platform. This is available to anybody on the internet. There's a lot of end user functionality within the application platform itself. You can toggle between each budget year. You can even use some data visualization features of the application that are shown there to show data over time. And if you really want to get into the weeds, you can download an Excel spreadsheet that has thousands of rows, and you can create the data the way that you want to look at it. So, unless you are like me and goof around with this a lot, you might not notice that there are all of those analytic tools and those functionalities built into the platform. Specifically, if you do want to download an Excel spreadsheet with all of those rows, you have to scroll all the way to the very bottom. But it does show everything that the budget book shows in hopefully a user-friendly way. And that was the goal for this, this particular platform.
The other thing, and I can kind of go to that next slide, I do think there is some stuff particularly on, and as someone who's been doing these for 20 years, like budget loves a good old three-fold, trifold. We all thought those were real cool. Nobody does threefold, trifolds anymore. It's all based off of what's on your website. So these are all set up like threefold, trifolds. I would not probably set them up that way. It would be really infographics and a launching pad and a flyer you could download on our website. But I think, some of these sort of just general fund expenditures by broad category, it's maybe just a good starting place for us to have and to try to put together. But I guess I just want to make sure commissioners have an opportunity to give us some feedback because we'd like to do some of this year.
Yeah, I really appreciate this part of the conversation and think that there's room to grow in making that information more accessible. And glad to hear you're not doing a trifold brochure that nobody will pick up or read. So I think infographics online are great. I also just think, videos like Brooke, you creating a little video about where all those little toggle tools are, things that just sort of, sometimes that's what's relatable and you can watch a 3-minute sort of walkthrough of something and get a better sense of how you want to go poke around and look at more. And then, the follow-up information to that is who to contact in county administration or which department if you've got more questions about X, Y, or Z.
I actually think what's on Socrata is exactly what we need, but I'm not sure that the community is finding that tool. There's so many distractions in it that maybe kind of bringing it down to a sort of an infographic version of that's stable, right? That you can, like, I'm thinking like a PDF, but all the information that I'm looking at sharing is there. It's just how to I'm not going to say dumb it down, but how to hold that steady. So someone can look at it, say, okay, how much of our general fund goes to this? How much of our CIP is here? And some broad overviews that we actually do on the first day of our budget hearing. But how does that, what's the takeaway for the public on it so they can see that?
In this setting, I think it's worth saying like what that tool is and where to find it. I mean, I've certainly played in it quite a bit over the years, but just Googling Douglas County, Kansas open budget, I think is how I've gotten there in the past. But it is a great tool and I don't know that enough people know about it.
I think that's a good idea. And because we've even talked about like, the advantage of Socrata on the website is we could upload every community partner request. Like they can all be there. Like it's all open records, community partners get it. We distribute it, and so if somebody wanted to dive in and learn more about what Visiting Nurses does and what their report they put together, they could certainly go read it. But if they want to stay at a high level and talk about functionality, I think we could probably try to prepare some stuff that might get them that.
You mentioned about having those community partner requests online, and how we did with ARPA, I thought was fabulous because an average citizen could go in and find out exactly what the request was, from whom, for how much. And that's great information. Other counties did not do it that way. You can't find anything about what was asked for or even what was granted. So I was really proud that we did that. I also think it'd be a great opportunity to put information about the community partner requests or departmental requests, just have that information available in a format like the open budget or something similar.
And I do like this idea of videos. I think that could be a lot of fun. And I want to point out now, because Carrie's not in this room and she'd be very disappointed me if I didn't point this out, that we actually have a really great video on our website from that KAC has put together, the Kansas Association of Counties. It talks about mill levies and property taxes. And I think does a pretty good job in about 5 minutes explaining a pretty complex problem of what a mill is and how property taxes are put together. So I'd highly suggest folks take a look at that, because I watched it again the other day and thought it was really valuable. Yeah.
It might not be a bad idea that about this time of year, those all get pushed out through our social media again, because
Right.
there are a lot of questions and a lot of misunderstandings about who has what role in terms of valuing property and also setting mill levies, et cetera.
Want to be thoughtful of commissioners' time. Do you have any kind of wrap up thoughts?
Anything
for us?
else from staff or any more thoughts from commissioners? Okay, well, thank you very much for this work session. Clearly, we're excited about it because we are well over our time. So we will adjourn until our 5:30 business meeting.